Are you listening to me? This question is often asked when the speaker thinks the listener is nodding off. We sometimes think that listening means only having to sit back, stay barely awake, and let the speaker's words wash over us. As a student, you most likely spend many hours in a classroom doing a large amount of focused listening, yet sometimes it is difficult to apply those efforts to communication in other areas of your life. As a result, your listening skills may not be all they could be. In this chapter, we'll examine listening versus hearing, listening styles, listening difficulties, listening stages, and listening critically. Hearing is an accidental and automatic brain response to sound that requires no effort. We are surrounded by sounds most of the time. For example, we're accustomed to the sounds of airplanes, lawnmowers, the rattling of pots and pans, and so on. We hear those incidental sounds and, unless we have a reason to do otherwise, we have trained ourselves to ignore them. Listening, on the other hand, is purposeful and focused rather than accidental. As a result, it requires motivation and effort. Listening, at its best, is active, focused, concentrated attention for the purpose of understanding the meanings expressed by a speaker. Listening should not be taken for granted. You can gain 4 compelling benefits by becoming more active and competent at real-time listening. When you focus on the material presented in a classroom, you will be able to identify not only the words used in a lecture, but their emphasis and their more complex meanings. You'll take better notes, and you will accurately remember the instructor's claims, informations, and conclusions. In effect, you'll become a better student. When you give your best attention to people expressing thoughts and experiences that are important to them, those individuals are likely to see you as someone who cares about their well-being, so listening helps you become a better friend. When you listen well to others, you reveal yourself as being curious and interested in people and events. In addition, your ability to understand the meanings of what you hear will make you a more knowledgeable and thoughtful person. Finally, when you listen well to others, you start to pick up on the more stylistic components related to how people form arguments and present information. As a result, you have the ability to analyze what you think works and doesn't work in others' speeches, which can help you transform your speech in the process. If listening were easy, and if all people went about it in the same way, the task for a public speaker would be much easier. Aristotle classified listeners into those who would be using the speech to make decisions about past events, those who would make decisions affecting the future, and those who would evaluate the speaker's skills. Today, we classify listening styles into 4 groups: people, action, content, and time. The people-oriented listener is interested in the speaker. People-oriented listeners listen to the message in order to learn how the speaker thinks and how they feel about their message. For instance, when people-oriented listeners listen to an interview with a famous musician, they are likely to be more curious about the artist as an individual than about music, even though the people-oriented listener might also appreciate the artist's work. If you tend to be such a listener, understand that the message is about what is important to the speaker. Action-oriented listeners are primarily interested in finding out what the speaker wants. Does the speaker want votes, donations, volunteers, or something else? It's sometimes difficult for an action-oriented speaker to listen through the descriptions, evidence, and explanations with which a speaker builds his or her case. Action-oriented listening is sometimes called task-oriented listening. In it, the speaker seeks a clear message about what needs to be done and might have less patience for listening to the reasons behind the task. Next, we have content-oriented listeners. They are interested in the message itself, whether it makes sense, what it means, and whether it's accurate. When you give a speech, many members of your classroom audience will be content-oriented listeners who will be interested in learning from you. You therefore have an obligation to represent the truth in the fullest way you can. You can emphasize an idea, but if you exaggerate, you could lose credibility in the minds of your content-oriented audience. Finally, people using a time-oriented listening style prefer a message that gets to the point quickly. Time-oriented listeners can become impatient with slow delivery or lengthy explanations. This kind of listener may be receptive for only a brief amount of time and may become rude if the speaker expects a long focus of attention. Time-oriented listeners convey their impatience through eye rolling, shifting about in their seats, checking their cell phones, and other inappropriate behaviors. But at times everyone has difficulty staying completely focused during the lengthy presentation. We can sometimes have difficulty listening to even relatively brief messages. Some of the factors that interfere with good listening might exist beyond our control, but others are manageable. It's helpful to be aware of these factors so that they interfere as little as possible with understanding the message. What gets in the way is something we call noise. It is one of the biggest factors to interfere with listening. It can be defined as anything that interferes with an audience's ability to attend to and understand a message. There are many kinds of noise, but I will focus on only the 4 you're most likely to encounter in public speaking situations: physical noise, psychological noise, physiological noise, and semantic noise. Physical noise consists of the various sounds in an environment that interfere with an audience's ability to hear. Construction noises right outside a window, planes flying directly overhead, or loud music in the next room can make it difficult to hear the message being presented by a speaker, even if a microphone is being used. Psychological noise consists of distractions to a speaker's message caused by the receiver's internal thoughts. For example, if you are preoccupied with personal problems, it's difficult to give your full attention to understanding the meanings of a message. Physiological noise consists of distractions to a speaker's message caused by a listener's own body. Maybe you're listening to a speech in class around noon and you haven't had anything to eat or drink. Your stomach might be growling. Maybe the room is cold and you're thinking more about how to keep warm than about what the speaker is saying. In either case, your body can distract you from attending to the information being presented. Semantic noise occurs when a receiver experiences confusion over the meaning of a source's word choice. While you are attempting to understand a particular word or phrase, the speaker will continue to present the message. If you are struggling with a word interpretation, are you distracted from listening to the rest of the message? An example of semantic noise is a euphemism. Euphemism is a diplomatic language used for delivering unpleasant information. For instance, if someone is said to be flexible with the truth, it might take us a moment to understand that the speaker means this person sometimes lies. But many distractions are the fault of neither the listener or the speaker. However, when you're the speaker, being aware of these sources of noise can help you reduce some of that noise that interferes with your audience's ability to understand you. A person can only maintain focused attention for a finite length of time. The limits of human attention span can interfere with listening, but listeners and speakers can use strategies to prevent this interference. Frequent breaks in the presentation of the material is an excellent technique, as is using visual aids and increasing audience participation. Good listening involves keeping an open mind and withholding judgment until the speaker has completed the message. Conversely, biased listening is characterized by jumping to conclusions. The biased listener believes, I don't need to listen because I already know what I think. Audience biases can refer to 2 things: biases with reference to the speaker and preconceived ideas and opinions about the topic or the message. Both can be considered noise. Everyone has biases, but good listeners have learned to hold them in check while listening. To truly understand listening, it's important to understand that there are actually 5 stages of listening. Let's go through them. First is receiving. This is the intentional focus on hearing a speaker's message, which happens when we filter out the other sources so we can isolate the message and avoid the confusing mixture of incoming stimuli. At this stage, we're still only hearing the message. In the understanding stage, we attempt to learn the meaning of the message, which is not always easy. Even when we have understood the words in a message, because of the differences in our backgrounds and experiences, we sometimes make the mistake of attaching our own meanings to the words of others. So much of the way we understand others is influenced by our own perceptions and experiences. Therefore, as the understanding stage of listening, we should be on the lookout for places where our perceptions might differ from those of the speaker and note them. Stage 3 begins with listening. If you can't remember something that was said, you might not have been listening effectively. However, even when you are listening attentively, some messages are more difficult than others to understand and then remember. Highly complex messages that are filled with detail call for highly developed listening skills. Moreover, if something distracts your attention even for a moment, you could miss out on the information. The fourth stage in the listening process is evaluating or judging the value of the message. We might be thinking, this makes sense, or conversely, that is really odd. Because everyone embodies biases and perspectives learned from widely diverse sets of life experiences, evaluations of the same message can vary widely from one listener to another. Unfortunately, personal opinions sometimes result in prejudiced evaluations. If you mistrust a speaker because of an accent, you could be rejecting important or personally enriching information. Good listeners have learned to refrain from making these judgments and instead to focus on the speaker's meanings. Responding, sometimes referred to as feedback, is the fifth and final stage of the listening process. It's the stage at which you indicate your involvement as a listener. Almost anything you do at this stage can be interpreted as feedback and should be paid attention to by the speaker. Let's move on to critical listening. Critical listening in this context means using careful, systematic thinking and reasoning to see whether a message makes sense in light of factual evidence. Critical listening can be learned with practice, but is not necessarily easy to do. Some people never learn this skill. Instead, they take every message at face value, even when those messages are in conflict with their knowledge. Problems occur when messages are repeated to others who have not yet developed the skill to discern the difference between a valid message and a mistaken one. Critical listening is first and foremost a skill that can be learned and improved upon. In this section, we're going to explore 6 different techniques you can use to become a more critical listener. Part of critical listening is learning to separate opinions from facts, and this works 2 ways. Critical listeners are aware of whether a speaker is delivering a factual message or a message based on opinion, and they are also aware of the interplay between their own opinions and facts as they listen to messages. Often, when people have a negative opinion about a topic, they are unwilling to accept facts that challenge that opinion. Instead, they question all aspects of the speech and have a negative predisposition towards both the speaker and the speech. 2. If something is factual, supporting evidence exists. However, we still need to be careful about what evidence does and does not mean. Assumptions are gaps in the logical sequence that listeners passively fill in with their own ideas and opinions, which may or may not be accurate. When listening to a public speech, you may find yourself being asked to assume something is a fact when in reality, many people still question that fact. When you listen critically to a speech, you might hear information that appears unsupported by evidence, and you shouldn't accept that information unconditionally, but should instead think about that on your own and do a little bit of research. Number 3. Sometimes people are so fully invested in their perceptions of the world that they are unable to listen receptively to messages that make sense and would be of great benefit to them. Human progress has been possible, sometimes against great odds, because of the mental curiosity and discernment of just a few people. In the world of public speaking, we must be open to new ideas. Let's face it, people have a tendency to filter out information they disagree with and to filter in information that supports what they already believe. And as public speakers, you must help the audience be open to new ideas. If you're listening to a speech and your common sense tells you that the message is illogical, you might very well be right. You should be thinking about whether or not the speech seems credible. In this way, your use of common sense can act as a warning system. However, when you are the speaker, you should not substitute common sense for evidence. That's why during a speech, it's necessary to cite the authority of scholars whose research is highly credible. It's all too easy to make a mistake in reasoning, sometimes called a logical fallacy, in stating your case. As both a speaker and a listener, one of the most important things you can do to understand a message is to relate new ideas to previously held ideas. If you can make effective comparisons while you are listening, it can deepen your understanding of the message. If you can provide those comparisons for your listeners, you make it easier for them to give consideration to your ideas. Careful, selective note-taking is important because we want an accurate record that reflects the meaning of the message. It's important to find a balance between listening well and taking good notes. To increase your critical listening skills, continue developing your ability to identify the central issues in messages so that you can take accurate notes that represent the meanings intended by the speaker. Ethical listening rests heavily on honest intentions. We should extend to speakers the same respect we want to receive when it's our turn to speak. We should be facing the speaker with our eyes open. We should not be checking our cell phones. We should avoid any behavior that belittles the speaker or the message. It doesn't mean we must accept everything we hear, but ethically, we should refrain from trivializing each other's concerns. We've all had the painful experience of being ignored or misunderstood. This is how we know that one of the greatest gifts one human can give to another is listening.